One tool that has really, really helped me in controlling my emotions and how I respond to situations is to view it from three different perspectives. So the first is my own perspective. That one's coming naturally because I'm the one experiencing it. The second one is to view it from the perspective of the other person. And then the third viewpoint is to view it from bird's eye view, someone who has no skin in the game. If a third party was seeing this and has no investment, how would they be interpreting whatever the situation is at hand? You start to do this and make this part of your muscle that you build, you're going to start to see that everyone has their own view of reality. You'll understand the motivations, you'll understand their background because we've talked about this on our other skill sets, but you're going to be able to see that everyone has their own view of reality and that's how they're showing up. Welcome to Prospecting on Purpose. As I mentioned, we're looking at balancing the hard skills and the soft skills, specifically when it comes to work. As a quick refresher, hard skills are specific abilities, capabilities, and skill sets that individuals can possess and demonstrate in a measured way. So these can be learned skills that enable individuals to perform job-specific tasks. Soft skills are personal attributes that enable someone to interact effectively and harmoniously with other people. Often, soft skills are considered natural abilities, but I feel strongly we can work on anything, which is why we're covering it on this show. So today we're tackling the soft skill of empathy. It's one of the most important elements because it weaves into all of the other skill sets, and I would say it enhances and it amplifies your other skills. Understanding other people's emotions, needs, and pain points is essential to business development. Paying attention, listening, and asking appropriate questions based on what you're hearing is going to fuel your business exchange forward. In today's world, we're very individualized. Collaboration is happening, of course, but in digital and remote environments. And with really overwhelming workloads and balancing our work with our personal lives, sometimes we can just have those blinders on to get our jobs done and just focus on the task in front of us. And that human element becomes removed. There are a lot of words that fall into this category, empathetic, understanding, sympathetic, feelings, being sensitive. And being empathetic is not synonymous with being sensitive. So I just kind of want to start there because those words get jumbled together, especially in work settings. In my experience, it seems that a lack of empathy is actually viewed as a strength. And I think this is where sensitivity and empathy get confused. When we think about successful salespeople and or valuable and impactful leaders, in order to advance up the ladder, some of those core attributes are in the hard skills category, right? The ability to have thick skin, communicate very directly, have difficult conversations, make difficult decisions. A lot of these hard skills that we've discussed as the intro to this series, they're not always sharing a lot of personal information, not asking questions, and so on. I'm assuming everyone's imagining someone in their heads as I'm rattling off this list. All of those assets are great, and they're going to be impactful. They're going to be more impactful if empathy are weaved into them. Think about it. Think about the different people that you've worked with over the course of your careers. Think about your favorite boss and your least favorite boss. I'm just going to make an educated guess here that your favorite boss could communicate directly and have difficult conversations, but they would understand if you needed to work from home because you had a sick child, right? Fill in the blank example here, but the point is that empathy establishes the connection required to build trust, which makes communication easier. And with trust and communication present, that's always going to result in better business. So how can we take an inventory on our empathy as a soft skill and finesse it and work on it? And this goes for people who feel they have strong empathy skills, like myself. It's still a skill that requires practice. And sometimes we have to have empathy towards people that are not like us, maybe people that are not as empathetic as us, right? So we're going to get into some examples that's going to be really... So we're going to get into examples and we're going to talk about 8 tips to be more empathetic at work. The first tip is to be curious. express genuine interest. And I always say that genuine interest is that first step in bridging the gap in relationship building. Empathy is a core element in relationship building. If we can approach all situations with a more open and curious mindset, it's going to give us the foundation to allow empathy to be part of the skills that we're pulling from in a business setting. Always be curious. Second tip is to practice self-awareness. And I would recommend you do a little self-assessment right now on how you'd rate yourself, scale of 1 to 10, specific to your empathy skills when it comes to work. I'll give a formal definition here. Empathy is the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what somebody else may be thinking or feeling. Research suggests that empathetic people tend to be more generous and concerned with others' welfare, and they also tend to have happier relationships and greater personal well-being. Empathy can also improve leadership ability and facilitate effective communication. I took a free test on a website called greatergood.berkeley.edu from Cal Berkeley. I will link it in the show notes, but if you're interested in taking a test, sometimes people need some metrics behind it. So I will link that in the show notes if you want to take a quick little test. But I would encourage you to think about how you sit on that scale when it comes to being empathetic. And if you're not as high as you want to be, then this is a great episode to listen to and start to pay attention to the fact that maybe it requires some work, and that is okay. We all need to practice our skill sets. And then, as I've already mentioned, this leads me to my third tip here, the ability to adapt to others. So once you understand where you fall on this kind of empathy scale, in my opinion, one of the most important elements of successful communication and leadership is the ability to flex to other people's communication styles. And I'm going to show you how this ties to empathy. So the example I gave earlier in this episode about somebody being direct and to the point, that's great. We work with a lot of those people. As an empathetic way that I could work with someone like that, maybe I recognize they have a heavy workload. They're busy. They're always traveling. So they're responding to emails on their phone. That means that I'm not going to send them an email that's just a novel with no clear request or action required. I'm not forwarding them a thread. I'm not CCing them on something that they don't have anything to do with. Sometimes I'll put in the subject line, no response required, non-urgent, right? I'm being empathetic to their style. I'll put things in bullet points. I'll make it really to the point. Sometimes I'll even put, in bold, what I need from you, followed by bullets. I am being empathetic to that person's way of receiving information. On the flip side, if I'm talking to someone more like myself, who's a little bit more chit-chatty, a little bit more open or personal in their sharing, I might start my email with, hey, so-and-so, how's your mom doing, right? Like reference something from the last time you spoke. How's your mom? How's your kid? I hope you had a great vacation, right? We always need to be flexing to the other person's communication style. I call it being divergent, if you're familiar with that young adult fiction series. I'm going to do a future separate episode on this topic with more of a deep dive on how to recognize other people's communication styles and how to adapt to them. But I wanted to talk about it here because I do think that we bucket empathy into like a certain type of mushy feeling type of person, and that is not what I'm talking about here. And if you are one of those mushy feely people, as I am, you need to still be empathetic to people that are different than you. So it goes both ways, right? It's not just people with lack of empathy, it's the empathetic people having to recognize that not everyone has the same type of style. The fourth tip that I want to talk about is something that really surprised me in my research, but when I was researching this episode, but the more I think about it, the more examples I could pull from. So the fourth tip is to consume diverse content. So reading fiction, nonfiction, watching different TV shows, just putting yourself into situations where if you don't have a specific frame of reference, then how can you get more data points to help pull from to be more empathetic in these situations? So I'm going to share a recent personal experience. It's kind of heavy, but I recently finished the show Painkiller on Netflix. And it is not a show I would have probably ever really clicked on or been interested to watch, but I was on a trip and the group wanted to watch it. And once we started, I got invested in the show. And if you're unfamiliar with it, Painkiller is a drama that's based on the opioid crisis in the United States and how Purdue Pharmaceutical in the late 90s brought the drug Oxycontin to the market, and how they built their whole success platform around sales and marketing and really pushing Oxycontin to the doctors who would then prescribe it to patients, potentially if they needed it or not. And then it's essentially heroin in pill form. Just to quickly summarize, that's obviously not scientific there, but it's not the best depiction of the sales profession. So go into the show knowing that if you watch it. But when I watched the show, personally in my life, I've been very fortunate enough to not have anyone directly in my life impacted by opioids. And so it's not a strong reference point in my life. I've never really seen it up close and personal. I haven't had that experience, thankfully. And I know a television show isn't the same thing. However, it did depict different characters, and there's a main character in the first episode who breaks his back and he was prescribed Oxycontin, and it follows his journey in the show. When you see stories like this, it allows you to have so much more empathy for those families impacted by that type of addiction. And I know that this doesn't always come up in a work environment, but it can. And it personally has for me with a colleague. And God forbid if it ever comes up again, I have more context to relate and empathize with that experience because I watched Painkiller, right? I can understand how that happens a little bit more, even if it's a TV show, even if it's something I don't have a personal reference point in my life. And I think that when we are in a work environment, we're so focused on getting stuff done that we do sometimes forget the human element to it. And it's just a nice reminder. And that's why I'm bringing it up here. It's just a gentle reminder that everyone is going through stuff in their personal lives, and showing up with curiosity and empathy instead of just, getting through our task at hand and what our motivations are. This is going to, in the long run, serve as more impactful relationships that we're building. And if you listen to this show, we all know the value of relationships at work, and specifically the importance of it in a sales capacity. So a little bit of a heavy example here, but I just wanted to share that because it was recent. That brings me to tip number 5, which is avoid judgment. And I think if you have the ability to start to be more empathetic in how other people are showing up in their work or their decision making, if you can start to finesse the skill and work on this skill, it's going to help you refrain from making quick judgments or assumptions about other people. Everyone has their own unique experiences, their own professional background, their own professional situations that they've had to navigate through, and that shapes our actions and our perspectives. So if we can be curious, going back to our first tip, it helps us default to snap judgments to try to understand the motivation behind their action. I wonder why so-and-so would do it this way. That's not the way I would do it. That doesn't mean it's the wrong way. Let's try to avoid judgment. And so it's really important to show up in a curiosity space as opposed to a judgmental space. And then number 6 is a really easy one, but share in other people's joy. This is the most simple way to find connection points and show that you're an empathetic person, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. If someone has a big sale, if somebody got a promotion, if they got engaged, anything that they're excited about and happy about in their life, be happy for them and then tell them you're happy for them, right? Try to remember it. If you struggle remembering it, write a note on your phone, write a note in your CRM, like find ways to share in other people's joy, because it's a really easy way to exercise that empathy muscle. Okay, another piece, number 7, on a similar thread, take time to learn about different cultures. Educate yourself about various cultures, beliefs, traditions. If you meet someone, not necessarily in a work environment, and they're open to sharing something about their life, take the opportunity to learn and expand your viewpoint, because you're going to build more data points to be more empathetic. I recently sat next to an Indian woman on a plane, and we were chatting, and she told me that she has started multiple businesses. And I asked her if she'd be open to talking through a couple of different scenarios I'm in the middle of navigating in my business. And of course she said yes. We talked through it. She gave me some great advice. And then the conversation turned to dating and astrology and how she and her husband moved to the United States and how they view Americans and her positive experience of immigrating to the United States from India to Chicago. And it was such a great conversation, expanded my viewpoint in different areas of life that I hadn't been exposed to before. Number 8, this one I don't think is going to surprise anyone, but put yourself in the other person's shoes. View any situation, any conversation from another perspective. Try to imagine how the other person might be feeling in this situation and feeling in their specific situation. What challenges, fears, or joys might they be experiencing? This perspective-taking exercise can help you connect on a deeper level. One tool that has really, really helped me in controlling my emotions and how I respond to situations is to view it from 3 different perspectives. So the first is my own perspective. That one's coming naturally because I'm the one experiencing it. The second one is to view it from the perspective of the other person. And then the third viewpoint is to view it from bird's eye view, someone who has no skin in the game. If a third party was seeing this and has no investment, how would they be interpreting whatever the situation is at hand? Once you start to do this and make this part of your muscle that you build, you're going to start to see that everyone has their own view of reality. You'll understand the motivations, you'll understand their background because we've talked about this on our other skill sets, but you're going to be able to see that everyone has their own view of reality, and that's how they're showing up. And it's going to help you understand their motives, take things less personally, and navigate through the conversation with less emotion behind it while still being empathetic. So this takes constant practice. I always am practicing this. And one quick example I can share, it's a little vulnerable for me to share, but as I mentioned on the show, I used to sell to hotels. And I had a hotel that opened to the public, and they were still having some issues with their lighting. And in this particular situation, the lights in the men's locker room and the women's locker room, so separate rooms, were physically wired together. And so they couldn't turn off the lights in one locker room without impacting the other. And they were upset about it and they were mad about it. And it had literally nothing to do with me or my product. I didn't do it. My product didn't do it. We couldn't solve it because the fixtures were wired together. The lights were wired together. And I was getting really frustrated because I was getting blamed for it. I was getting yelled at for it. I was expected to fix it. I think I was just the only person around still to help. And I was trying to help, but I was getting really frustrated, right? That was a difficult situation to navigate. And I was venting to one of my colleagues about it. And he said to me, think about it, Sarah. They just spent millions of dollars and years opening this hotel and something isn't working, right? They're just upset. And that was a really helpful, humbling moment for me, right? It's still not my fault, but it shifted the way I showed up to offer solutions to help them solve it. Another tool that has helped me practice empathy when I'm in a type of disagreement or a tension or a difficult situation is to find reasons to be grateful for that person or the situation. So some ways you can frame gratitude here is, what lessons can I learn from this experience? I personally grew from this conflict. Next time I have this situation, I'll know how to handle it. This helps me make a decision to move forward because I got clarity from this situation. I have a stronger relationship with the client because I solved their problem, and so on and so on, right? So it's hard when tensions are high. It's hard when egos are, impacted, feathers are ruffled, but practicing gratitude has always served me, and it helps me reframe it from an empathetic mindset. So I encourage you to try it. And then the last tip here, tip number 8, our final tip, is practice active listening. So when we're interacting with others, focus on truly listening to what they're saying without interrupting them, without formulating responses in your mind, without thinking of your agenda and what you want to say next and what you need to get out of this interaction. Pay attention not only to the words, but also their tone, their body language, the emotions you're seeing. This is going to show the other person that you value their thoughts and feelings. And if you're actively listening, you can ask questions, ideally open-ended questions. This is going to help navigate and put the puzzle pieces that we've been building through tips 1 through 7 that we've already discussed, right? Active listening is what really ties it all up with a bow. Active listening is another critical soft skill, and it's an area that takes practice, and it's definitely an area that not everyone does well. But if you can work on it and master it, you are going to differentiate yourself in your communication style and how you build those relationships. So we're going to dive deeper on active listening in next week's episode, but it's a big part of the overall skill of empathy. So that wraps up our 8 tips. I'm going to give a quick recap here. So number 1, be curious, right? We're always expressing genuine interest and understanding, being curious about their motivation. Number 2, practice self-awareness. Work on this skill if it's an area that you feel you may be weak in. Number 3, adapt to other people's styles. We're going to do a deeper dive on this topic on a future episode. Number 4, consume diverse content, open yourself up to other things. That's going to give you more data points if you don't have your own personal experience to pull from. Number 5, avoid judgment. Number 6, share in other people's joy. Easiest way to have empathy connection points. Number 7, put yourself in the other person's shoes. We are viewing things from their perspective too. Everyone has their own view of reality. And if we can see it from their point of view, it's going to change how we take it personal. It's going to change how we show up in our emotions. It's going to change how we navigate the conversation. It's a huge, huge piece to practice. And then number 8 is active listening. Work on your active listening skills. It's a huge part of expressing empathy. It shows that you're not there just for you and your own benefit, but that you're here for a mutually beneficial relationship. So we will discuss active listening in more detail next week in next week's episode. And to wrap this up, I just want to remind us that building empathy is an ongoing process. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a genuine desire to connect with others on a deeper level. By consistently practicing these strategies, you can become more attuned to the emotions and needs of those around you, ultimately strengthening your ability to empathize and layering this soft skill into every other skill set, including the hard skills required to be impactful and successful in your work. I appreciate you taking the time to tune into this episode. Empathy is something that I enjoy talking about in a work environment because it's important and it's not something that's measured and it's not always something that's taught or practiced. So if you listen to this episode, I want to give you major kudos to showing up and working on this skill set. Whether you're an awesome empath or not, right? This is something that we can all work on. So I appreciate you taking the time to tune into this episode. Empathy is such a crucial skill and it's going to be weaved into some of our hard skills. So that's why we started with empathy first. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. I'd appreciate if you would subscribe to the show, rate it, leave a review. Thank you so much to those who have already done so. I appreciate you showing up this week. Next week, we're going to talk about active listening. It's going to be a good one. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.